And tonight, let's welcome Josh as our speaker.
Hi, my name's Josh. I have the allergy. And I say that because it's out of the doctor's opinion. And what happened to me, let me back up. I never wanted to ask for help. And I think that's a big problem. If you're sitting in this room, you probably struggle with asking for help. And so I'm going to open up with a prayer because I'm going to ask for help. So Father, I thank you right now that you would release your grace that's more powerful than anything any one of us could be going through. I thank you, Holy Spirit, that you can speak to the hearts and minds of everyone here present, and that we can just enjoy and rejoice being sober. And after Easter, the rarely group after Easter, we're all resurrected from what could have been a very, very terrible ending for each one of us. So we thank you in Jesus' name, amen. I got to open that way. What happened to me, I came into the first time I walked into an AA meeting, I sat down and I had this poem, and for the first time in my life, I was going to get honest about where I was at in life. And I had this poem that said, who said life was yours to give, some may wish to die, not live. And that was written to God. And so just for you guys to see, like, it's a miracle. It's the grace of God that I'm sitting up here. I'm opening with a prayer when it was like I was thumbing God when I came in because I didn't like the cards that I was dealt. And so that's how transformational this process right here can be. God's no respecter of persons. If he did it for me, he'll do it for you. And so it's a pretty exciting journey. But I say allergy because I'll get to part of my story where I, played the two-step game, and I wasn't really working the steps, wasn't really digging into the process. Ultimately, I didn't want what you had. And I wasn't willing to go to any length to get it. And there's probably people, the chances are in a group this large, there's people here that, are dropping their court papers. That's how I first came in. Sign my paper. And then I would go to the local bar, and I'd come, because you get like 45 minutes, and come back and get the paper out of the basket at the end of the meeting. And so chances are there's people that are drunk and high right now in this room. And that's okay, because what's cool is like everyone accepted me. They saw me dropping the paper and walking off. They saw me, the look in my eyes, and I wasn't all there. And we see you, but you're welcome here. Like, how cool is that? Where can you go when you don't know where else to go, but you want to live a different life, and you don't want to be stuck in the torture that we live in? So anyway, the allergy was in the doctor's opinion. So when I finally reached a point in my life where I was really digging into the big book with my sponsor. And I'm from Tucson, Arizona, born and raised. And this guy, he would introduce himself. He would say, "Hey, my name's Mike. I'm a member of AA." I'm like, why? That's interesting why he says that. And what I found in the foreword of the big book, it talks about omitting your first name and just saying you're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I would hear this guy speak, and I could see that he was like, wow, he knows the big book. And I knew the big book was designed to teach me how to live a new way of life. And so I was intimidated by this guy. Big guy, prison guy, tattoos, was a heroin junkie, really. And I knew he knew what he was talking about. He was very intimidating. He was probably like 6'3", a little bigger than me. And I forced myself, like, when I was finally ready, when I wanted what he had and I was willing to go to any length, I approached him. He told me, go read the doctor's opinion for a week straight. And see, here's the thing. If I don't want what you have and I'm not willing to go to any length, I'm not ready to take steps. That's like a prerequisite in the big book to taking the steps. If you want what I have and you're willing to go to any length, then you're ready to take certain steps. So it's funny, some of the old timers, they'll tell you, they like say, oh, you want me to be your sponsor? All right, make your bed, call me at 6 a.m. And then, you know what happens. Hardly any people do it, right? So the point is like, it's really easy in our crowd. It's easy for us to spot someone and gauge their willingness, and your willingness is key. Like the book says, the willingness is key. But in the doctor's opinion, the allergy changed my life when I was reading it and studying it, finally at a place where I wanted what you had, and I was willing to go to any length, and it like went off on the inside of me. And I was like, what, dude, I have that. The allergy, this allergy he's describing, where like if I pick up any mind-altering substance or I drink anything, I can't get enough of it. It releases a phenomenon of craving, and I'm just going to go burn it down for the rest of the night, for a few days, for a week, for a month. Who knows how long, right? And so that changed my life to know that, because if I have an allergy, then I can't pick it up anymore. If I have a peanut allergy, I'm going to stay away from peanuts. If I see a patch of poison ivy, I'm not going to run through it. So that was for me really simple, but so what the program did, though, is then it trick bagged me into the real problem. Because I started studying the book and realized that the root of my troubles is selfishness and self-centeredness. And I was like, oh, great, I got a lot of work to do then, right? So when I grew up without a father, I'm just bouncing around because I'm just sharing as my heart leads me, and I'm going kind of off of the crowd. But when I grew up without a father, that damaged me. I don't know if anyone else in here has come from a broken families. If you look at statistics, there's probably the vast majority of us have a broken family. Even if you lived and you had both parents and they weren't present, you know. And so I grew up without a father, but I remember absorbing as a young child. What I was told is that I heard stories about, like, my mom. I have 3 older sisters and a younger brother. My mom's 8 months pregnant with my younger brother, and she was getting physically abused by my biological father, who was like bipolar, running drugs across the border. And that's just that was my coming into this world. And she would tell me that she'd be trying to breastfeed me, and he's like beating on her. And she would, I'm just this young little baby looking at my dad. Like, that was my experience coming into this world, is I'm just trying to eat, and this man is beating the woman that's nurturing and feeding me. And so what happened at 2 years old, though, is Sheriff Dupnick, he was the sheriff for many, many years. We lived out in the middle of nowhere in the desert because my father, or people like me, people like us, we don't get along with society very well unless they're giving us what we want. And so he made us move out in the middle of the desert because he didn't get along with people. And what happened is my mom finally snuck out, 8 months pregnant with my younger brother, hiked for help because it was a stretch to get to help. And she had to leave her 3 daughters and her little baby boy in this trailer with this man. And that must have been really tough. But she was all beat up, and the sheriffs and deputies and stuff came. He's shooting back at them, and he's holding me and my 3 older sisters hostage in a trailer. So yeah, I'm trailer trash. What's up? It gets better, right? I upgraded to the city housing projects, but we'll get there. So we're held hostage in here, and he gives a shotgun to my oldest sister, who at the time she's like 12, and says, if the bad guys come in the door, shoot them. So like, this is how I'm growing up, right? It's jacked up, man. And I'm absorbing all this as a young child. And because we're sponges from like 1 to 5, man. We're just sucking it all up. So what happened is they finally end up apprehending him, and he goes to prison. And that's when it transitioned to, like, my mom got on this long waiting list. She's a single mother, all abused, jacked up, and 5 kids. And we ended up in like a 1-bedroom, and then her name come up on the list. And so then we're in city housing projects, and we're literally, no offense to anyone else, we were the only white family in the city housing projects. So I was like the Eminem guy, right? On the wrong side of the tracks. That's where I grew up. So the vast majority of my childhood, that was like 8 or 9 years of my childhood, was in city housing projects. So I learned how to cuss really good and enunciate in Spanish. Really good. It's predominantly Hispanics, and then several blacks as well. But that's where I grew up, and I just remember at that age, I remember the police, the officers, the undercover guys, when my dad was getting out on good behavior, he ended up only doing like 10 years for good behavior, but he had these restraining orders. He couldn't come anywhere near any of us. It was this whole crazy deal. And then they came and reinforced the windows on the city housing projects I lived in, and they put this big, you guys remember when they had cell phones were like in a suitcase? Yeah. So it was like this suitcase cell phone, and it was in the bathroom downstairs, and they put extra deadbolts on the lock. So I was instructed as a young boy that if like my father shows up, we're supposed to all barricade ourselves in this bathroom and call 911. And I remember that. I remember that very vividly. And so I was like, I had this fear, you know? And I also then would question God and sit there on my bunk bed at night and wonder, like, why was I created? And why don't I have a dad? And, like, what am I here for? And start asking these deep questions as a young man. And it was all jacked up. And so moving through, like, I started just doing things for attention. I was like the kid that was the class clown, right? Like, I just need some attention, man, because I had this huge void. Like, I didn't have the love of a father in my life. My mom did a great job, but she's my mom, you know, and she did the best she could. But I didn't have a father, and so I was seeking out that validity in all kinds of different ways, and that got me into a lot of trouble. I remember being in middle school, and I found a way to hack into the snack machines, man. I found a way to like pop the thing, and I would come through with a coat hanger through the little holes, and so I would take like a hall pass, and I would just go jack stuff out of the snack machine. I remember going on an 8th grade trip to Disneyland and Six Flags and Knott's Berry Farm. That was like huge for me because I was like the ghetto kid, right? And I'm like going to these cool places. This is like a dream. But I'm like stealing things at Disneyland so that like for attention. I was jacking stuff, man. And I didn't know they had this undercover guy was like following me all throughout the day. And so they're just stacking a case, right? You know they're stacking a case against you. Anybody hearing me? Just be careful. They're stacking it. And so they stacked a case. I ended up in there's a whole world underneath Disneyland. I was like taken by this officer, and then I'm like underground, and they're like calling my mom, and it was this embarrassing thing, right? And of course I just lie to them. And you know, I only tell them like maybe 3 of the 15 things I stole, right? And I don't know, maybe they didn't see me steal all the things, but I went and retrieved those things, and it was very embarrassing. Like, hey, I stole this thing, they caught me. I'm an 8th grader, man. What the hell's wrong with me? So I knew that there was something wrong with me. I remember asking my mom around that age, like, am I ever just going to be okay with, like, just sitting on the corner of my bed and not having anything to do? I remember thinking I needed something more. I needed something more to do. I needed something to look forward to. If there wasn't like some sporting event, I'm an athlete. Any other athletes in here? And I needed something to do, man. Like my intensity, if you mix an athlete with alcoholism, dude, it's going down. And so like I'm a baseball player, wrestler. I'm still very intense. Whatever I'm doing is very intense. But what the blessing in that is that when you switch over to living in God's will for your life, it's intense. Like I'm intense, and I'm not cutting corners. I'm getting after it, and I don't really care what anybody thinks because it transformed my entire life. And so I'm very lost at this age, and I remember around that age, I remember seeing that my sister, she lived in San Diego, and her husband at the time, he was in the Navy, and they're like smoking weed, and they just smoked weed all the time. And I remember being pissed off at him. Like, why do you do that? I remember being, why do you do that? And it was like within a year, I'm smoking it too. But isn't that crazy? Like there was something in me. I knew something was wrong with me, and I needed more of something to entertain me. And so what that does for a guy like me is like, I can't get enough. So as soon as it's lame right here, I'm switching tracks and I'm going to get after it over here. And it just doesn't matter. Like, I'm going to get more no matter what. And so I started smoking weed too, started doing weird stuff. I remember the first time I drank, it was at a New Year's Eve party at my buddy's house. And they're pouring screwdrivers and drinking beers and stuff like that. And we're sneaking beers off into his room. And I don't know, probably 12 years old. And when they do the countdown and there's people, you guys know the people when you're out there partying and they just like take a sip and or drink like half of it or leave partials. I call them dead soldiers. I'm like, don't leave any dead soldiers, man. I mean, I was the guy that was, if I'm leaving a bar and there's dead soldiers, like I'm filling like the thirst buster with all these random drinks, right? And then I'm just like, and they're like, sir, you have to go. And I'm like, wait. Like, I need more, you know? We just need more, and like, it doesn't have to be like that. There has to be something substantial. What I'll say is that I can't stop, in and of myself, I can't stop consuming alcohol unless I allow God to consume me. I just can't. I don't know what it's like going to be like for you or how it's going to play out for you, but if I don't allow God to consume my life, I'm going to consume something that's going to cause damage to me. And that's just the way it is for me. And so I remember drinking, like that was awesome. I remember feeling the buzz, and I didn't get too out of control that night. I would say fast forward a little bit of time, there was this guy named Frankenstein that was a bum that lived on the corner by the 7-Eleven. And I went to stay the night at my buddy's house, right? We played ball together. I go to stay the night at his house, and I'm like, let's drink, bro. Like, let's get some photies, right? And so we go and we find this dude Frankenstein, right? And we send this guy Frankenstein with some of our money, and he doesn't care, right? You know, but he goes and he buys it for us. He gets us several Cobras, Cobra 40s. Any Cobra 40 drinkers? They're nasty, right? Like, I felt like crap that night, and it didn't matter. I just went back and did it again, right? So, but I remember drinking, and then I remember being under this Palo Verde tree in the desert of Tucson, Arizona, like this empty desert lot. Dude Frankenstein buys me some photies, and then I'm like beatboxing and rapping like a cappella. It was like hilarious. You know, like we're just getting after it, right? And I end up at his house, and we're trying to sleep, and this is when I remember experiencing this, and some of you can relate probably. I remember laying down on the floor to fall asleep, and the whole house was spinning, man. Like, that was the first time I had that experience. It was like, you know, like the at the fair, dude, where it's all G-force, like, but I'm just trying to sleep, and it's like, you can't sleep like that. It sucks, man. And so I'm trying to sleep, and then next thing you know, I'm like, projectile all over this dude's room, man, my buddy's room. And this is his parents' house, and we're young, right? So we're like trying to like making all this noise, we're drunk, we're trying to clear this up, dude. Don't let him find Frankenstein. He's gonna hook up us next time. We need Frankenstein. And I remember he used cologne. We cleaned up throw up, and then he used cologne to try to cover the smell up. Don't ever do that. If you go back out tonight, don't use cologne to try to make it smell better. It doesn't work. It just it's a very unique smell. Trust me. But that didn't stop me, right? That doesn't stop us. You know what? For me, the great obsession of every alcoholic that the Big Book talks about is that I can do it like a normal person. I can party and still be okay and manage life. I spent years trying to like figure out a way to make that come true in my life. And for me, and if you're like me and you're sitting here tonight, the great obsession has to take its course in your life. It just has to. Like we see people come and go, and why? Because they still think they can do it somehow. That's the great obsession. It's gonna knock you on your butt every time. I spent years trying to be, you go through the description of all the different types of alcoholics in the Big Book, I tried to be every single one. Like, I tried to just do it on the weekend. I tried to be the guy, like, doing, pyramid schemes, like Amway, stuff like that. I got into some of that when I was older because I want quick money. We want quick money, right? Nobody wants to work for money. I don't understand.
Hey, you guys quiet down back there, please.
I don't understand the alcoholic or the addict that, like, actually holds a job down. That wasn't part of my story. Like, I'm just going to rip you off. I'm going to go flip some product without a receipt and make up some story. I'm going to convince you to give me your credit card and your PIN number and hook you up because you like to party with some ecstasy or something and tell you that I'll give you a couple $100, and then I end up, like, ripping off the ATM machine with your card over the weekend for like $1,000, and I just tell you to call it in stolen on Monday, and I'll convince you of that. I convinced people of stuff like that. I hope the feds aren't listening. But you know what's cool is, like, every part of my story, you can broadcast it on the evening news. Like, I'm not afraid of it anymore. The big book talks about we commence to outgrow fear. Like, I'm not afraid anymore. When fear crops up, it's like, man, I have a God that's so much bigger than any fear that comes into my life today. And it's so chill, man. Like, I still have a drinking problem, but I take God shots every day. I don't drink anymore, but I still need to drink something. Something has to intoxicate me sufficient enough to what was working when I drank. Something. And there's something here, like this program. If you walk this thing out and you seek God, you're going to find something that is way more sufficient than what it was like partying. Way more sufficient. Like, I can't get enough of it. And so I have that same attitude. You know what's cool about people, if you're like me? Once you switch tracks, it's game on. Like, there's no going back. If you make a decision, you're like, oh, I'm going to go to any length. It doesn't matter. You guys can all oppose me tonight, and I'm going full throttle for God in my life. Like, no joke. When you reach that point, people like us, we're extreme. We go to any length to get loaded. I mean, I did. I remember walking all the way across town sometimes. Like, I would walk all day because I didn't have another way to get to where I needed to get. I remember riding in cars with these old weird hippies up into the White Mountains. There's a lot of hippies. They bought that land in like the 70s in the White Mountains when it cost, like $1,000 an acre or something. And so they all populated that area. But this old hippie, I went with him to the White Mountains. Why? Because he had a mound of coke. He's going to go make some deliveries, right? And he's like, why don't you come with me? It'll make you look like father and son or going to the White Mountains. And I'm like, that sounds like a great idea. So we hid everything under some stuff in his engine and brought another friend of mine, so now it looks even more real, like father and two sons. Like, not a problem, right? And so we get up there, and then it turns into this crazy, people ask, what is your DOC? Well, sometimes when people say that, I'm thinking of Department of Corrections, because I did some time too. So, but I always tell people, what do you got in your pocket? And I was always thirsty. Like, I didn't care. If it was going to change the way I feel, because the big book says I drink for the effect. I don't know, can you relate to that? Did you drink because it made you feel different? So anything you can give me to make me feel different, I'm game for that. So that's just the way it was, but I was always thirsty. Like, I'm thirsty right now. Hey, bro, I still got a drinking problem. I just don't drink alcohol anymore. So we go up to the mountains, and he's got this massive bag of shrooms, this mound of coke. We got stuff to drink. We got plenty of weed, And he's like, I got to make deliveries. Here's this, and this. Like, the bags were all labeled. Have a good time. And we're on this. You guys ever been in one of those cabins? It's like a round cabin. They build it round. So all the beams come together, which when you're shrooming is really trippy. The beams come together, pretty weird, like this crazy spiral. So we're totally loaded. We're on 80 acres in this cabin, me and my buddy, totally alone. there's a Native American sweat lodge on the property. So what am I doing? Like, I'm trashed. I'm doing coke, shrooms, smoking, drinking. I'm trying to like dumpster my life, just wow. And but in that moment, life was all figured out. I had it all figured out. I was staring at that ceiling and everything was making sense, and I was connecting all the pieces and all the issues of life, right? And then so I'm all spiritual, right? And so I'm gonna go do the sweat lodge. So next thing you know, like I'm walking around like doing several rounds of sweat lodge totally naked on 80 acres. Just walking around, man. But I have life figured out. Trust me. I promise. And so like those are the type of people that walk into this room. If you're anything like me, it's like, how cool is that? Like for us to just with open arms, like the crazy naked guy on 80 acres with hippies is like, that's okay for you to come here. Oh, the ghetto guy from city housing, that's okay. Come on in, man. You just come on in, man. If you don't want to drink, you have any kind of desire not to drink, come on in. You don't want to use anymore, come on in, man. Come on in, sit down, man. God will change your life. Just hook on to this thing. So it's pretty cool. I ended up going off to college. I was able to hold it together enough through high school because I was an athlete. And so I had this passion and this love for sports. Anybody else have passion and love for sports? I still do. I was so excited about it. Yeah, that is Steve over there raising his hand. They're getting a chuckle out of that one. So anyway, I was all about sports. I had this intense passion for it, and that's what held me together now. Like I wanted to be able to compete. And so I wanted to be at the sporting events and be able to compete. And when I got loaded, I don't compete very well, right? Or I just don't show up. Like I remember for my senior year, the pictures for senior year wrestling, I wasn't there because it was like a late start day. And you know what's a good idea when school starts late? Like, what are we doing at school, man? Let's go drink, right? And so we went and got this Aftershock. We started with Aftershock, and we broke the bottle open, and we're like, on the bottom of the bottle, and then like we also stole the bottle of Jägermeister. That wasn't a very good mix, like that. Anyway, that was not a good mix. But we went through that whole bottle of Jägermeister. I come to this girl that I knew from high school. I was like on her front lawn, just passed out, and like I wake up and I'm like, oh crap, dude, what time is it? My mom's gonna pick me up from wrestling practice. And so I got to get back to the school so mom can pick me up from wrestling practice like nothing happened, right? So I missed senior pictures for wrestling that day, so I wasn't in the yearbook for that part. I still pull it out and chuckle like, man, I wasn't there, bro. That's stupid. But my mom picked me up. She's like, you smell like a brewery. And you know what's my relationship with my mom growing up without a dad? I had a really cool, intimate relationship with my mom. I was very honest with her. She was like the experiment hippie that tried some weird stuff, and then it was like, I probably shouldn't do that, if I want to be responsible and live life, so it wasn't even a thing for her, but she could relate. So I remember one night I went out tripping on acid, and I thought I snuck out like without anybody noticing, but of course like that, it was like that stereotypical. Your mom's sitting in the dark kitchen. And you guys are laughing, but when you're tripping, it ain't funny, man. So like I'm sneaking back into the house, and I'm coming through the kitchen, and she's like, Joshua? And I was like, oh, hi, Mom. And she's like, well, what do you think you're doing? And I was like, well, I'm actually peaking on several hits of LSD right now, Mom. and I was expecting like, go to your room, you're grounded. I don't know, like I'm tripping, right? But next thing I know, she's sitting me down at the kitchen table, and she's like, I was shrooming in the desert one time. And all of the creatures came alive. And she starts talking about her experience, and I was like, whoa. anyway, my mom's awesome, and she raised 5 kids as a single parent, went through 9 years of college and law school. We moved from the city housing projects to the east side of Tucson, where I ended up then going to Saguaro High School. And I remember coming back from my first day of high school, and I was like, Mom, I've never seen that many white kids in one place before. But I wasn't trying to be funny. I was like, I don't know, like, this is weird. So it was just this strange transition, and I lit this kid on fire my freshman year in high school. Like, you know, I'm not, I seriously did. But I was messed up in the head, man. Like, even like, I'm not even getting loaded. I'm in biology class, and we're watching Channel 1 News. They would play, like, this news channel, start the day, we're in biology, and I have this Bic lighter, and I'm like, if I hold it under there at a good distance so he doesn't notice, and then all of a sudden his armpit's going to get really hot, and he's going to be like, oh, that's hot. And I'm like, haha, that's funny, right? That makes sense to me. Stuff like that makes sense to my mind. And so I did that, but then that's not the way it played out. His shirt lit on fire. So then we're doing a biology experiment now, right? So he gets up and he's swinging on me, and like Mr. Kirchberger was the teacher there. Here, how cool is this? I end up getting sober, and I come back and I'm coaching wrestling at the high school I graduated from, and Kirchberger's still teaching there. And it was so cool to run into him, like, in a different light, man. Like, we literally get to be resurrected. Like, happy Easter to you. If you're in this room and you want to live this new way of life, you get to be resurrected. And so happy Easter. But I went up to him and I was like, hey, Kirchberger, remember when I lit that dude on fire in your... And that's what's so cool about being in AA is, like, we don't have to be afraid of our stories. We don't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. Like, I say all of these things, like, I don't really talk about this stuff except to relate this, to the new guy, to the new gal. Like, we're crazy when we come in, and that's okay. That's okay. Like, I was the same way, and you can ask anyone that knows me, is like, you would have absolutely no clue that I used to live like that because of how I live today. And the only reason that happened to me is because I worked these steps with another man. You know, I remember him telling me, if you won't take direction from a man that can stare you in the face and you can touch, you won't ever take direction from an invisible God. And that changed my life. It changed my life forever. I started taking direction from him. I remember sitting in a meeting. We went and did meetings in the county jail where I actually gave my life to the Lord 20 years ago, in that county jail. And we were doing these meetings in the county jail. And my sponsor, he's like, you know why I know this guy's going to stay sober? Because he'll just do whatever I tell him to. He was like, watch this. Drop and give me 20. And I just, in front of all these inmates, I'm like, yes, sir. And I was like, what's the big deal? Like, I finally reached a point in my life where I was like, why don't you just tell me what to do, bro? Like, I'm going to mess it up, man. Just, Cameron, tell me what to do, bro. And so I just started doing that. And then I found out where this guy went to church. And he was like, I go to church over here. And I was like, well, then that's where I'm going to church. It's that simple. I'm serious. Like, I didn't want to try to create something out of nothing. I was digging into the process, and I realized, like, my dilemma is lack of power. That's what the big book says. I'm powerless. I got no power over this deal. I can't be in control of my life. I'm insane. I need to be restored to sanity. Something help me. God help me. Okay, you go to church over there. That's your God? Then that's my God. You know, like, I'm not trying to figure it out. And so the process of turning your will and your life over to God, as you understand him, like, you can believe whatever you want to, but if you continue to seek him, he reveals himself to you. It's this amazing process. I think the founders understood that. They were like, hey, we know who God is. We have this understanding of God. This is the history of AA. This is how it started. But believe whatever you want to, because if you get scared and run off, you're probably going to die. You're going to die in your alcoholism if you don't stay sober long enough to have an encounter with God. That was my experience too, and so I just started going to church with this guy. That was my experience. I went, every week for the first couple of years of my sobriety, and on April 16th, I'll have 14 years. I didn't really mention that, but I'll have 14 years straight. Thank you. So I got sober at a young age. Like, I got sober 20 years ago, but I had 7 years playing this tug of war where I was like, just kind of messing around with it, throw the thing in the basket, go, mess around, get 5 months, relapse, get a couple years, relapse. I didn't really care. I wasn't interested. I had to, the great obsession had to play its course on me. And so then it's been almost 14 years consistent since I finally reached that point, like, you tell me what to do, man. So turning my will and life over to God, I remember seeing the line in the big book that says, the effectiveness of my entire program depends on how well I turn my will and life over to God. Like the history of AA, this altruistic movement, there was no big book when people got sober in the beginning, folks. It wasn't a big book. They were living what ended up being written, right? And so the whole key was the magic happens when one alcoholic sits down and works with another one. The magic isn't necessarily the meeting. It's us working one-on-one with each other. You get like an introduction or an appetizer to what this program is about when you come to a meeting. But the real stuff happens when you sit across the table, man to man, woman to woman, and you start opening your life to this person. And you start digging into this process and getting real about all the nonsense and what you need to be healed from and what you need to walk away from. And so that's what started happening to me. I would meet him every week. I'd go to the Nooner every day for a couple of years. I'd meet him every week for a couple of years. And then I ended up meeting this pastor where he was going to church every week for a couple of years. And so I'm just digging into it, man. Like, I'm drinking this new stuff and I'm getting loaded off it. Seriously. I'm getting loaded off it. Like, don't be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. Like, I was walking in the Spirit, man. I was walking this thing out. And what's so cool about where I ended up at church, the founding pastor of that church, he has over 40 years sober. He got sober in Oklahoma in 1980 when they would like do speaker meetings and have a big book right here and a Bible right here. And so he would like from the pulpit tell people, hey man, you need to stop coming to church and go to AA. Like, how cool is that, right? Because people in AA have these resentments towards church, right? And then church is like, well, people in AA don't know who God is. And people in church are like, they need to learn how to do inventory. Right? Like, I'm like bridging the gap right now in my story. Like, church people, you need to learn how to do inventory. AA people, seek God, please. So that was like, I started connecting these pieces, and there was lots of sobriety. And my sponsor, the pastor, several other people, on any given like church service that we would have, there would be like several hundred years of sobriety at this church. It was kind of like going to a meeting, but we were just talking about God, digging in the Bible. And so that was a really cool process for me. I dove headfirst into that because I was all about it. And so I tell the newcomer, like, dude, don't just run off to church. You need to stick in AA and work the steps with a sponsor. Don't run off to church and think, Jesus is going to heal you or whatever. Like, don't do that. I did that early on. It doesn't work. But I got a really good foundation, and then I ended up being in charge of the coffee ministry, set up and tear down at church. I ended up meeting a wife. Go figure. Like, I was just sleeping around the weird, naked hippie guy, ghetto dude, whatever. Like, but then I surrendered my life to God, and for me, this is part of my story. Is I was like, I'm supposed to wait till marriage, man. That's what this says. That's God's will for my life. Because to thine own self be true. I have this allergy. I got to walk away from that. And I need to start defining what God's will is for my life. But it's not subjective. It's what does God want for my life? And then I get in line with that. I walk in obedience toward that. It started with listening to another man. And then I grow in intimacy with God through the steps. after I admit where I'm wrong, and then I grow in intimacy with God, and I see if there's someone else to help. It's this continuous process of practicing principles in all my affairs. And so I was living these steps out at this local church, and I was doing coffee, set up, tear down. I was going to Bible school, and the next thing you know, like I'm this licensed minister, and I'm getting married, and I waited to have sex until I was married, and that was such a weird process. My honeymoon was super weird. I'm just telling you, right? Because if you party like we party, lots of crazy stuff goes down, and then all of a sudden I'm like doing it God's way, right? And then we end up at Lake Apache, which I married the right woman. She's like, let's get jet skis and go to Lake Apache. She's a normie, by the way, and she knows everything about me, and she still chose to marry me. How cool is that, man? Like, I told her everything about my past life, and she was flabbergasted because my wife and my 3 children, they don't know anything about my past. Like, it doesn't even make sense to them. Sometimes I'll tell a funny story. My 7-year-old Jeremiah, he's like, tell me that cave story again, Dad. Like, he gets a kick out of it, right? Because it's just like, doesn't make sense. His dad's like serving at the local church, and then he's like this whack job, really, like this old, it's like there's this other guy, right, that his dad was. And so they don't know anything about the old guy, though, and how cool is that? My wife and my 3 kids, they never have to see that guy, ever. They don't ever have to see him. And so that's so cool. And so the miracle for me, probably one of the biggest ones, is that God took a fatherless man that was broken and made him a loving father. That's so cool, man. Like, my wife and my kids, they mean so much to me, and they'll never see that old guy. And that's the miracle of this program. Like, you come here and you dig into the process, you get totally recreated. Your hearts and desires that you probably don't even know, God will make those things take place in your life if you're willing to turn it over. So like I said earlier on, I can't believe that the time is running out. Seriously, I don't even know where the time went right now. But like I said in the beginning, if for a guy like me, if you're like me, for me to stop consuming alcohol, I had to let God consume all of me. And if you're here tonight, like, I just hope that my story, I hope that you could relate. Like, yeah, that dude's crazy and I'm crazy. And now he's like, serves in a local church, and he has a wife and 3 kids when I couldn't even keep a job for 6 months. And I didn't care to like earn any money. I'm just going to rip it all off so that I can get loaded and party and do all kinds of weird crap, man. Like, there's time for one more. I'm remembering I went off to play ball in college and baseball. And so I went off, and there's this small Mormon town, Safford, Thatcher, Arizona. People start, they're pretty funny, right? Like they're saying Jack Mormons are like, dude, like, we don't drink soda. And I'm like, drink soda? Like, where's the kegger, right? And so it was this weird scenario for me to be in. But I remember trading my love of sports at that age for my love of drinking. I remember when that change took place. I traded my passion for being an athlete for partying, and I turned into a full-time idiot really fast. And I remember that going off to college. So I'm in the 30-pack with you remember the old Broncos with the window that went down? That's pretty cool. I was with these guys, and I had a 30-pack, and this bike cop, like on a mountain bike, he's on the main drag. He's on the main drag, and people cruise the main drag. So stupid, bro. Like, how dumb was I? We're on and I'm just pounding these silver bullets, right? They're so obvious. And this cop is like, right? Well, if you're listening online, I'm pointing like, pull over, sir. So we pull over, and then like I'm the arrogant prick that is like, he's like, whose beer is this? And I'm like, mine. You got a problem? Like, that's just how we are, right? Like, we don't care. And then I had stolen some cigarettes from the store, so my jacket was bulging, And he's like, what do you got in your pocket? Because it kind of looks like maybe there might be a gun in there, right? What do you got in your pocket? None of your business, sir. And he's like, really? What do you got in your pocket? I'm like, I told you it's none of your business. And so he comes towards me. And so I'm a wrestler, right? If you know anything. He comes towards me and he's like putting his hands on me, and I'm like, bow! Like I'm slapping his arms down like, none of your business, right? And then next thing I know, I'm getting pepper sprayed in the face. That sucks. Like I couldn't see, I couldn't breathe. And my instinct was like, I just did a shot. I did a blind shot, like, and I picked this cop up and slam him down on Main Street and bust his glasses, like, and then like he's got all these friends, right? So now I'm getting beat up. And I remember the police report. My mom ended up becoming an attorney of law, and she said, I became an attorney to try to keep you out of jail. And so that was like the joke for some years. But in the police report, it said, we tried to apprehend Mr. Taylor, and he got hand control and escaped like a wrestler. So it was like, so if you ever seen it, watched wrestling, like there's these cops, they're like pounding on me, and I'm like, wow, like I'm escaping. And then I remember being in a cell by myself and being like, oh, 4-on-1, dude, why don't you guys 1-on-1? Like, what's up? You know? You know? And then I remember being in another cell, and it was like my mom, you know, got beat on by my dad. So there's people, believe it or not, in jail that they brag about beating on their wife and stuff like that. There's a lot of domestic violence in there. And so like this one guy, he was puny too. Like I can't believe he wanted to fight me. He was puny. And I didn't know jail or prison etiquette, okay? So there's certain words that you should not use. And punk ass B is 3 of them. So, and so what happened is this guy's bragging about beating on his wife, and like we're playing spades. I'm learning spades. You got to learn spades if you're gonna do some time, right? And so I'm learning spades, and he's like bragging about it, and like finally I'm like, dude, you're a punk ass B, bro. And he was like, what? I was like, what's the big deal? That's what you are. Like, why are you beating on a woman, dude? Like, what's up? You want some of this? And then so then the CO they broke it up or whatever, and they were like, no. So anyway, like that's just the way I lived. It was totally chaotic. I didn't care. I just wanted to get loaded. I didn't want to have to work for anything. God took a fatherless man, made him into a loving father. And, you know, I did it God's way, and it turned out to be beautiful. Like, my wife is beautiful. She's an RN, and we both serve in a local church, and I reach out to people like you. Like, I love this type of crowd, man. We're crazy, bro. And so I just like to take people that are like me and just like, let's go be crazy for God, man. That's what I do today. And that's what I'm going to continue to do, and I'm totally out of time. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight.
All right, let's give another round of applause for our speaker, Josh.